On the night of October 23, 1856, in Halifax County, Virginia, something happened that every white man in the South swore was impossible. A slave broke his chains. For 15 years, they had treated him like an exhibit, a freak, a beast of burden. They weighed his muscles, measured his skull, made him lift impossible loads just to hear other men whistle and clap. They called him a curiosity, a specimen, a magnificent creature. They never called him what he was, a man. He stood 7 feet, 6 inches tall. His hands could close around a grown man's skull the way a child palms an apple. His shoulders were so broad he had to turn sideways to pass through doorways. In August heat, when other men moved like they were wading through boiling air, he carried 3 men's labor on his back without breaking pace. On that October night, those same hands and shoulders became something else. Weapons by dawn, 8 white men lay dead. The Blackwood family line ceased to exist, and Halifax County learned a lesson it would spend generations trying to forget. There is no chain strong enough to hold a man who has decided he would rather die free than live enslaved. But to understand how Goliath became a killer, you have to understand how Cornelius Blackwood first turned a stolen boy into a giant. It began in Richmond, Virginia, September 1841. The auction yard smelled like sweat, tobacco, and fear. Men in fine coats stood under awnings, fanning themselves lazily while human beings were lined up and displayed like livestock. Backs checked, teeth examined, muscles squeezed. Cornelius Blackwood had not come to buy monsters. He had come for what he always came for, strong backs and calloused hands to feed his tobacco fields in Halifax County. Then he saw the boy. He wasn't a man yet. Maybe 15, but already over 6 feet tall and still growing. His arms hung past his knees, hands like dinner plates, feet too long for the standard slave shoes stacked in rough piles nearby. Even among the other captives, crowded and beaten, he looked wrong to white eyes, too big, too powerful, too dangerous. The auctioneer saw the eyes turning toward his newest lot and went into performance mode. "Gentlemen," he announced, voice booming across the yard, "I present the rarest specimen you are likely to see in your lifetime, direct from the Dinka region of Africa, a people famous for extraordinary height. But this one is exceptional even among them." Cornelius pushed through the crowd for a closer look. Up close, the boy was even more unsettling. Not just because of his size, but because of his eyes, dark, sharp, and watchful, measuring every face that stared at him. There was no dull vacancy there, no broken obedience. Just awareness, just anger. "Can he work?" Cornelius called. The auctioneer laughed. "Can he work? This Negro can do the labor of 3 men. I've seen him shoulder 600 pounds and cross a warehouse without so much as a grunt." 600, gentlemen. Murmurs, whistles, nervous laughter. The bidding started at $3,000, a staggering price for a single slave. 3,500, Cornelius called. 4,000, another planter snapped. "A man from South Carolina. 4,500, Cornelius replied, barely hesitating. His mind was already doing calculations. How much spectacle could be squeezed out of that body? How many side bets? How much prestige? The South Carolina man paused, ran the numbers in his own head, and stepped back. "Too rich for my taste," Solon the auctioneer roared. "To Mr. Cornelius Blackwood of Halifax County for 4,500. The most expensive slave Cornelius had ever purchased. But as he stared at the boy's huge hands and unnatural proportions, he wasn't thinking about tobacco leaves. He was thinking about crowds, about ticket prices, about profit. This wasn't just a worker. This was an investment. The boy barely spoke a word of English when he arrived at Blackwood. Plantation. Everything he knew came from screams and commands on the slave ship, a few broken phrases, curses, orders. His real name was something soft and musical, full of clicks and tones Cornelius couldn't pronounce and didn't care to learn, so he erased it. At dinner that first night, the boy stood chained in the corner of the dining room, towering over everyone, his head almost brushing the ceiling. The house slaves tried not to stare, but they couldn't help themselves. He looked like a mythical creature dropped into their world. Half man, half nightmare. Cornelius carved his meat, took a sip of wine, and glanced at his new property. "You'll need a proper name," he said loudly, so everyone at the table could hear. "Something fitting for a giant." He smiled, a thin, satisfied line. "You're Goliath now." His wife Constance chuckled. "From the Bible." "Of course," Cornelius replied, eyes never leaving the boy. "The giant who gets killed by a little shepherd boy. Fitting, don't you think?" His two adult sons, Jacob and Nathaniel Jr., laughed. At the end of the table, Goliath stood perfectly still. He understood almost none of the words, but he understood the laughter. He understood being turned into a joke. Jacob studied him with the careless cruelty of a rich man's son. He picked up a piece of bread and tossed it to the floor at Goliath's feet. "Pick that up, giant," he said. "Let's see how you bend." Goliath didn't move, didn't kneel, didn't even look at the bread. "I said pick it up," Jacob snapped, standing, his face reddening with anger. "He doesn't understand English yet," Cornelius said lazily. "Then maybe we should teach him." Jacob grabbed a riding crop from the wall. The first strike cut across Goliath's shoulders, the second across the backs of his legs. On the third, Goliath turned, slowly. For a brief, frozen moment, Jacob looked into eyes that were not empty, not submissive, not broken. There was something ancient there, something dangerous, something that made Jacob, a man who had never feared a slave in his life, take one involuntary step back. "That's enough," Cornelius said sharply, rising from his chair. He stepped between his son and his investment. "This Negro cost me $4,500. You damage him, you pay for him. Understood?" Jacob's jaw clenched, but he lowered the crop. "Yes, father." That night they chained Goliath in the cellar, the only place with a ceiling high enough for him to stand upright. Heavy iron encircled his wrists and ankles, links thick as a man's thumb, tethering him to a thick support beam. He ran his fingers over the fresh welts on his back and legs. They barely hurt. He'd known worse on the ship. He knew worse was coming, but he remembered Jacob's face, the flinch, the flash of fear. They should be afraid, he thought. In the language of his homeland, they should be very afraid. Within a month, Cornelius had turned his new purchase into Halifax County's favorite Sunday entertainment. Every week after church, carriages rolled up Blackwood's long drive, bringing plantation owners and their families, bored young men eager for spectacle, and women who pretended to be scandalized, even as they leaned forward in their seats, eyes shining. Cornelius had cleared out a big barn and remade it into a little arena, benches in a semicircle, lanterns hanging from rafters, a wide space in the center where the attractions stood. Goliath was always the main event. They led him out in chains, iron manacles clamped around his wrists and ankles. The chains were thick, heavy, meant to show dominance as much as provide it. Goliath had already learned enough English to understand the performance. "Lift that," Cornelius would say, pointing to a cotton bale weighing 300 pounds. Goliath would bend, chains rattling, and lift it onto one shoulder. Gasps, nervous claps. Now the barrel, a full water barrel over 400 pounds. Goliath would hoist it in both hands and press it over his head. Cornelius would have the audience count aloud, laughing as they turned a man's suffering into a game. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Look at those arms, my God. The real thrill, though, came with the fights. Who wants to see 3 good men take down the giant? Cornelius would shout. There were always volunteers, overseers from neighboring plantations, reckless sons of wealthy families, sometimes even professional fighters, hungry for reputation. The rules were simple: 3 white men, fists only, against the chained giant. If the 3 won, they split $50. If Goliath won, he got extra food that week. Goliath never lost. They'd bloody his nose, split his lip, bruise his ribs. 3 men punching, kicking, circling. It hurt, it always hurt. But Goliath had learned patience. He waited. He let them get tired, let them grow cocky. Let one step too close. Then one massive hand would shoot out, wrap around a throat, and lift a 200-pound man into the air like a rag doll. The other 2 would rush in. Goliath would swat them aside, just short, casual movements. But the impact sent them sprawling. Sometimes bones broke. Sometimes men didn't get up. By the time Cornelius stepped in, grinning, calling it off, the crowd was buzzing, half horrified, half delighted. Magnificent creature, isn't he? Cornelius would beam, collecting money from side bets. Worth every penny, creature, never man. Sunday was spectacle. Monday to Saturday was work. In August, the tobacco fields turned into green ovens. By 9 in the morning, it was already 95 degrees, the humidity thick enough to chew. 50 slaves moved slowly through the fields, cutting, bundling. Carrying Goliath did what they did, only with 6, 7, 8 times the weight. while other men carried 40-pound bundles. Goliath carried 300, sometimes 4, stacks of leaves piled so high on his back that only his legs showed, moving slowly through mud that swallowed his feet, 6 inches deep each step. "Move faster, giant." Overseer Thornton would bark, whip cracking through the air. The leather bit into Goliath's shoulders. New scars layered on old. He never flinched, never slowed. When the others rested, he kept working. When they were done for the day, he hauled equipment, dug ditches, loaded wagons. At night, they locked him alone in the barn. They'd had special chains made just for him, links thicker than a man's wrist, attached to an iron collar that weighed 20 pounds by itself. They bolted the chain into the main support beam so deep it was as if they nailed him into the bones of the building. His food came in a trough, like a horse, like an ox, like an animal. For the first year, Goliath did what he needed to do: work, eat, survive. In the second year, the language began to come together in his mind. Commands turned into sentences. Snatches of conversation became clear enough to understand. By the third year, something inside him had hardened. The last soft parts, hope maybe, or belief that good behavior might earn him anything, turned to stone. His eyes, once alive with watchfulness, went flat and unreadable. The other slaves noticed. "Dangerous, that one," whispered Uncle Moses, an old field hand who'd spent 60 years in chains. "I seen that look before." Nat Turner's eyes looked like that back in 31, just before the killing started. "He barely talks," young Samuel muttered. "Just works, eats, sleeps. That's what makes him dangerous," Moses said quietly. "Man who talks, you know what he's thinking. Man who's silent, he's thinking more than anyone. He's planning, waiting. Waiting for what?" Moses just shook his head. "Pray we never find out." Year 4, the scientist arrived, Dr. Artemis Whitmore from Richmond, a physician with a special interest in the differences between races. He had written long, confident essays arguing that black people were a different species, closer to animals than white men. His proof came from skulls and bones and measurements. Cold numbers used to justify cold cruelty. The first time he heard about Goliath was in a gentleman's club. Cornelius, smug and a little drunk, was bragging about his prize slave. 7.5 feet tall, Artemis, strong as 3 men. "You've never seen anything like him." Whitmore almost dropped his drink. "My God," he breathed. "A living specimen of such extreme proportion. I simply must examine him. This could prove everything I've theorized. For a fee," Cornelius cut in smoothly. They came to terms, $20 per visit, plus expenses, in exchange for non-damaging examinations. The first session took place in October 1845. They chained Goliath to a wooden frame in the barn, arms and legs spread, iron biting deep into skin. He couldn't move more than an inch in any direction. Dr. Whitmore circled him, measuring tape in hand, eyes gleaming with curiosity that had nothing to do with compassion. "Remarkable," he muttered. "Absolutely remarkable. Height 90 inches, arm span 96, skull circumference." He pressed his fingers into Goliath's brow, jaw, cheeks, prominent brow ridge, prognathous jaw, all consistent with my theories. "Does he even feel pain?" Cornelius asked. "Sometimes I wonder if the hide is too thick for the whip to do much." Whitmore's eyes lit up. "An excellent question." Easily tested. He reached into his medical bag and took out a scalpel. "This may sting," he said, in the tone a man uses on a horse. He drew the blade across Goliath's forearm. 3 inches long, deep enough that blood spilled down his arm and dripped to the barn floor. Goliath's jaw tightened. He did not scream. He did not even groan. "Fascinating," Whitmore murmured. No vocal response. He made another cut, this time across the bicep. Goliath's breathing quickened. Sweat popped along his hairline. Still, he stayed silent. Incredible restraint. Or perhaps the nerves are less sensitive. The third cut was deeper, across the chest. Blood ran in thin rivers down Goliath's torso. For the first time, a sound escaped him. A low guttural noise, somewhere between a growl and a moan. Not human enough for Whitmore. "Ah," the doctor said, satisfied. "He does feel pain. Just tolerates more of it. I'll note as much." He turned to Cornelius, already thinking about the next visit. "Next month I'd like to examine his muscle fiber more closely. Perhaps take some small tissue samples. Will it affect his work?" Cornelius asked. "Minimally. Then we have an agreement." The examinations continued every month. They drowned him to measure his lung capacity. They cut pieces of bone from his ribs. They tested his vision, his hearing, his reflexes. Each time Goliath was chained. Each time he was treated as an object, a puzzle, never a person. And each time he clenched his teeth and refused to scream. On the outside he was still the perfect slave, the prize, the monster who obeyed. Inside pressure was building, like water behind a dam, like fire under stone, something that could not stay contained forever. Year 7 on Blackwood Plantation began the way every other year had for Goliath: heat, work, chains. The tobacco plants grew, shriveled, grew again. Overseers came and went. Dr. Whitmore kept cutting and measuring and writing, turning Goliath's scars into footnotes. And then one morning a wagon arrived from South Carolina, and everything changed. They came in a line, house slaves from an estate that had been broken up and sold after its master's death. Women with quick hands and tired eyes. Men who knew how to polish silver, press shirts, serve at tables without making a sound. Cornelius wasn't overly interested. House slaves were his wife's domain. He stood in the yard watching absently as Mistress Constance inspected them. Then a small woman stepped down from the wagon, and Goliath saw her. He was hauling timber for a new barn. A load 6 men would normally share stacked easily across his shoulders. Sweat slicked his back, dirt clung to his ankles, and iron links rattled when he walked. She was hanging laundry behind the big house, bare feet in the grass, arms reaching up to pin sheets, moving with quick, efficient grace. She was tiny, maybe 5'2", with delicate wrists and light, quick fingers that looked built for sewing and cooking, not field work. Her face wasn't striking in the way the white men talked about beauty, but there was something in her eyes, steady, observant, refusing to be deadened. Goliath rarely looked at anyone for long. Attention drew danger, but he looked at her. She didn't look back. House slaves weren't supposed to acknowledge field hands, especially not a walking spectacle like him. 2 different worlds inside the same cage. He carried his load past the laundry line, the timber a familiar weight. As he passed, he heard something that stopped him inside, humming a melody, soft and low, threading through the snapping of hanging sheets. The tune slid under his ribs and grabbed something, buried deep. He knew that song. Not from Virginia, from before, from the tall grasses and slow rivers of a place these people had stolen from him, a Dinka song. A song his mother had sung as she pounded grain and watched the sun fall over the water. He dropped the timber where he was meant to, walked the long way back to the barn instead of his usual route, long enough that he had to pass the laundry again. She saw him this time, her hands stilled on the clothespin. She looked up, taking in the size of him, the scars, the iron, the tired fury in his eyes. Her humming stopped. "You don't know that song," Goliath said. The English words came slow, dragged through a throat that rarely spoke for anything but "Yes, master," and "No, sir." Her eyes widened. "My grandmother taught it to me," she said quietly. "Before she was sold south. She said it came from the homeland. She didn't know the words, just the tune." "It is from the homeland," Goliath replied. He closed his eyes and for a heartbeat wasn't standing in Virginia. He was back on a riverbank thousands of miles away, small and unscarred, listening to his mother's voice drift over water. "It's about a river," he murmured, "and home." When he opened his eyes, she was watching him differently. "I'm Naomi," she said. "Goliath." She frowned slightly. "That's not your name." "No," he said. "But it's the only one they let me keep." The relationship didn't explode into being. It grew in stolen minutes and careful glances. Sunday nights. After Goliath's humiliating exhibitions were over and the guests had gone home, there were small pockets of time when the plantation machinery slowed. If the overseers were drunk enough, if Mistress Constance was satisfied, the house slaves and field hands slipped into their own quiet routines, Naomi. And Goliath kept finding reasons to be in the same place, passing each other near the delivering linens to the barn, crossing paths by the kitchen door. It was never safe to stand too close. House slaves caught fraternizing with field hands could be whipped bloody or sold. Goliath, as Cornelius's prized investment, would face worse. So at first they just talked. Naomi corrected his English, teaching him not just commands but the softer words. "Not thing," she would say, shaking her head with a little smile. "Chair, window, sky." She taught him how white people talked when they thought no one was listening, how their business words masked cruelty, how investment meant human flesh. In return, Goliath gave her pieces of a world she'd never seen. He told her about the grasslands, about animals taller than horses, about songs that rolled in rhythms English didn't have. You remember all that? She asked one night, her voice full of quiet amazement. You were so young when they took you. I remember every second, he said. My mother's face. My father's laugh, the day they came with chains. He drew patterns in the dirt with a fingertip, his massive hand surprisingly gentle. I carry those memories like weapons, he said. One day, I'll need something worth fighting for. Memories, people, something more than survival. She looked at him for a long time. Maybe you already found it, she said softly. In March 1853, Naomi made a dangerous decision. Blackwood had a custom, one of those twisted, benevolent practices slave owners like to brag about. If two slaves wanted to marry, he would allow it under conditions. The union wasn't legally recognized, of course. Slaves had no legal selves, but Blackwood would let them share a cabin, and any children born would be his property from birth. Naomi went to Mistress Constance first. As required, I'd like permission, she said, hands folded, eyes lowered the way she'd been trained, to cohabit with Goliath. Constance almost dropped her teacup. The giant? She laughed. Child, he'll break you in half. No, ma'am, Naomi answered quietly. He's the gentlest man I've ever known. Gentle. Constance snorted. Have you seen him fight? Naomi met her eyes just for a second. I've seen him choose not to hurt people when it would be easy. That's different. Constance sipped her tea, studying the young woman in front of her, then shrugged. If you want to tie yourself to a monster, that's your business. Ask the master. If he agrees, I won't object. Who knows, maybe we'll get more giants out of you. That would be interesting. With Cornelius, the conversation was colder. You want to share a cabin with the giant, he repeated. Yes, master, Naomi said. Goliath stood nearby, silent, hands at his sides, heart pounding hard enough to make his wounds throb. Cornelius tilted his head, thinking. How tall are you, girl? 5 foot. 2, sir, and he's 7.5. Cornelius leaned back in his chair. If you breed true to his size, he almost smiled. I could have a whole line, he murmured, half to himself. Giants for sale. Imagine the prices. He looked up, eyes bright now, seeing not people but numbers. You have my permission, he said. You can move into the small cabin behind the quarters, the one for mated couples. Goliath swallowed. The chains? He asked. At night? Cornelius hesitated. For 12 years, Goliath had been model property. No escape attempts, no defiance. The chains at night were more for show, for his own peace of mind than necessity. Fine, he said at last. No chains in the cabin. Relief flared in Goliath's chest and froze with the next words. But if you ever try to run, I'll sell your wife so far south you'll never hear her name again. Do you understand me? Goliath's jaw tightened. I understand. That night, for the first time in 12 years, Goliath lay down to sleep without iron on his wrists or ankles. The cabin was small, the bed comically undersized beneath him. He'd slept on barn floors and hard-packed dirt so long that the straw mattress felt wrong. Too soft, too fragile. Naomi curled against his chest, her entire body fitting easily into the space his arms could encircle. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his huge hand resting carefully on her back, afraid his strength might crush her even in sleep. This, he thought, is what freedom feels like. Not the papers white men talked about, not the freedom they refused to grant, but this. Warmth in the dark. Another heartbeat pressed against his, a door that closed at night with no chain clanking after it. Even in slavery, there were small pockets of something else. He should have known it couldn't last. By 1856, they had been together 3 years, no children. It frustrated Cornelius. He wanted his breeding pair, wanted tiny giants he could auction off for ungodly sums. Naomi and Goliath both knew it. What Cornelius didn't know was that Naomi had her own quiet war going on. Every day she used herbs her grandmother had taught her about. Wild carrot seeds, rue, bitter things steeped in water and choked down before dawn. Knowledge passed woman to woman in back. Rooms and whispered conversations, how to keep your womb Empty in a world that wanted your children for chains. Won't bring a child into this, she told Goliath one night, when he asked about it gently. I won't hand them another body to sell. Goliath understood. But there was a deep ache inside him he couldn't deny. A part that longed for a child, a living link that said he had existed, that something of him would outlast the plantation and the whip and the white men who thought they owned his every breath. In August 1856, the herbs failed, or she stopped taking them, she never said which. One morning, Naomi lurched out of bed and barely made it outside before she vomited into the dirt. Her hands shook. Her body trembled. Then she looked up at Goliath with wide, stunned eyes and a trembling smile. I think, she whispered, I think I'm pregnant. For a moment, the world went completely silent. Goliath felt something in his chest unlock, like a door he'd barred years ago swinging open on rusted hinges. Pregnant, he repeated, almost afraid the word would vanish if he said it wrong. I'm sorry, Naomi said quickly, tears pricking at her eyes. I tried to stop it. He reached for her face with surprising softness, for hands that had broken men's bones. Don't ever apologize for this, he said. Don't apologize for our child, his child, their child. For 3 months they lived inside a dangerous secret. Naomi wore looser dresses. She moved slower near Constance. Goliath watched her constantly, seeing every change. The way she tired faster, the way her hands went to her stomach when she thought no one was looking. They talked about names, about impossible futures. I want our child to never know what iron feels like, Goliath said. Not on their skin, not in their dreams. Then they'll have to be born somewhere else, Naomi replied. Not here. I'll find a way, he said. I swear it. I'll find you. I'll get you both out. Our child will be born free. You can't promise that, she whispered. I can, he said quietly, because I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. By October, the secret couldn't be hidden any longer. Mistress Constance noticed first. She watched Naomi move across the parlor one afternoon, eyes narrowing. Girl, she said, are you with child? Naomi hesitated a fraction too long, then nodded. Well, Constance said, lips pursing. It's about time. The master will be pleased. Tell him at dinner. That evening, Naomi stood in her usual place, serving roasted duck and sweet potatoes, while the Blackwoods discussed crops and debts as if human misery were a line item in a ledger. When there was a pause, she spoke. Master. Sir, I'm with child. Cornelius's head snapped up. How far along? He demanded. 3 months, sir. A grin split his face, sharp and hungry. Excellent, he said. We'll finally see if you breed true to his size. If that baby comes out a giant, I'll have a matched pair. Do you know what that's worth? In the corner of the room, Goliath stood like a carved statue. His entire world balanced on those words. Breeding pair worth property. He felt that same place in his chest, the one that had just opened, begin to crack again. Not with joy this time, but with something darker. Not yet, he told himself. Not yet. He still believed on some fragile level that he could figure out a way through this. He didn't know that far away in New Orleans. Men like Marcus Doyle were already assigning prices to Naomi's womb. 3 days later, the future was sold over whiskey. Marcus Doyle was a slave trader who specialized in special stock, the kind of human beings rich men bought not because they needed labor, but because they wanted curiosities. Pretty women. Unusual bodies. And now a pregnant woman carrying the child of a giant. Plantations in Mississippi and Louisiana are getting bored, Doyle said, swirling his drink while Cornelius listened. Regular breeding stock doesn't excite them anymore. They want experiments, he leaned forward. Your girl, she's small. 5'2", you said, and she's carrying that giant's child. Do you have any idea what some of these doctors and scientific gentlemen would pay to watch how that turns out? Cornelius didn't answer. Doyle answered for him. 3,000, he said. Cash for her, pregnant. As is. Cornelius's eyebrows rose. I paid 800, he said slowly. And you'll get 3,000, Doyle replied. Now, or you can wait and hope she survives childbirth, hope the baby is giant-sized, hope they both live long enough to make you 5,000–6,000 later. He shrugged. Lot of ifs in that plan. Bird in the hand, Cornelius. 3,000 is a heavy bird. Cornelius went to bed that night, thinking not of Naomi as a person, not of Goliath's face, but of numbers. 3,000 now, maybe 5,000 later. Risk, reward. In the morning, he'd made his choice. He found Goliath in the tobacco barn, loading cured leaves onto a wagon, the familiar rhythm of work keeping his hands occupied while his mind turned over impossible futures. "I've sold your wife," Cornelius said. No preamble, no softening, just numbers turned into a sentence. The bale Goliath had been lifting slipped from his hands and crashed to the floor. "What?" His voice sounded wrong in his own ears. "Marcus Doyle made an excellent offer," Cornelius said as if he were discussing livestock. "She leaves tomorrow morning." "No." The word tore out of Goliath before he could stop it. "No, you can't." "I can and I have," Cornelius snapped. "She's my property, Goliath. Same as you, same as that wagon. I sell what I please, the baby," Goliath managed. "My child is also my property," Cornelius said. "Doyle's interested to see if she produces another giant. For science." He said the last words like a joke. Something moved on Goliath's face, some flicker that for the first time in 15 years he couldn't fully hide. Cornelius saw it. "Thornton," he shouted over his shoulder. "Bring the heavy chains." Overseer Thornton appeared with the thick manacles they used for Goliath's Sunday performances. "Just a precaution," Cornelius said. "Until you calm down. Can't have you doing something stupid." They chained him to the barn's central beam, the iron biting into familiar grooves on his wrists and ankles. That night, Naomi came to say goodbye. Mistress Constance allowed her 5 minutes, no more. Naomi ran to him as soon as she was through the barn door, shackles clanking around her ankles, hands reaching up for his face. He bent down awkwardly, still bound to the beam. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't stop it." "Don't," he said, voice cracking. "This isn't your fault." He pressed his forehead against hers as far as the chains would let him. "The baby will be born free," he whispered. "I will find you. I will find our child, I swear. Our child will never know chains." "Don't promise what you can't," she began. "I keep my promises," he cut in. "All of them!" "Time's up," Constance called from the doorway, voice cold. "Come on, girl." Naomi pressed something into his chained hand, a small scrap of cloth torn from her dress, the only object in this world that belonged solely to her. "Remember me," she whispered. Then she was pulled away, dragged out into the night. Her sobs echoed through the barn until they faded into silence. Goliath stood there, chained to the beam, fingers clenched around that scrap of cloth. His wounds, his scars, his memories, his patience, his hope, all of it compressed into one point inside him, something that had bent for 15 years. Finally, it snapped. They kept him chained for a week, no work. Little food. Just darkness and iron and the smell of hay. Cornelius wanted the anger to burn out and die. Instead, something colder formed in its place. On the 8th day, Overseer Thornton came with the keys. "Master says you can work again," he grunted. "One wrong move and you're back in chains for good." "Understand?" Goliath nodded. The shackles fell away, metal clattering on the barn floor. "Get yourself cleaned up," Thornton ordered. "Then report to the fields. We're behind on harvest because you've been sulking." Goliath walked to the water trough outside and washed the sweat and grime from his face. As he did, he looked up and really saw something he'd ignored for 15 years. The blacksmith shop just 30 yards away. Tools hung neatly on the wall. Hammers, chisels, hooks, bars of iron. Inside, Josiah worked the forge, his back turned. For the first time, Goliath didn't just see a building. He saw possibilities. He noticed the kitchen door of the big house, always left open late into the night. He noticed the timing of Thornton's morning rounds. He remembered where the sons slept, where the rifles were kept, when Dr. Whitmore visited, where the driver lived. For 15 years, Goliath had survived. Now, for the first time, he began to plan, not escape, not yet, justice, blood. That night, back in the empty cabin he'd once shared with Naomi, Goliath sat on the floor, the little bed looking wrong without her small body curled into its center. He pulled the scrap of cloth from under a loose floorboard, pressed it to his face, breathed in the last faint trace of her scent. "I promised you," he whispered into the darkness. "I promised our child would be born free." He stared at his hands, hands that had carried burdens, hands that had been measured, cut, marked, hands that could break bone as easily as twigs. "How?" he muttered. Does a slave free anyone? He had no money, no legal name, no rights, no power but his strength, unless he made power, unless he took it. The thought of what that meant should have terrified him, should have sent him to Cornelius's door to beg for mercy, before the ideas hardened into action. Instead, for the first time in years, he felt something he almost didn't recognize. Hope, not gentle hope, not the kind that waits and wishes. A hard, violent kind, a hope sharp enough to cut. Goliath had spent 15 years moving through Blackwood Plantation like a shadow, silent, obedient, predictable. A giant body with a hollowed-out center. A tool, a spectacle, a machine that lifted and hauled and endured. But now, something inside him had changed, not loud, not obvious, something cold, focused, calculating, and for the first time, he began watching everything. The new gaze of a giant, the morning after his release from the chains. Goliath walked through Blackwood Plantation with a different kind of awareness. He tracked every movement, every door, every pattern. He watched Overseer Thornton start his rounds at 5:30 a.m., always from the slave quarters, always alone for the first hour. He watched the kitchen door of the big house stay open until 10 p.m., the cooks too tired to remember to lock it. He noticed which floorboards creaked in the hallway. He noted that Cornelius's rifle sat in the study, loaded, and the pistol in his bedroom drawer. He overheard Cornelius complaining again that he couldn't hit a deer at 20 yards. He watched the sons. Jacob slept with a pistol under his pillow. Nathaniel Jr. didn't. Too careless. Too confident. He listened to house gossip the way a soldier listens for enemy signals. He memorized Dr. Whitmore's visiting schedule, the third Thursday of every month. The doctor always spent the night, always stayed in the first-floor guest room, and according to Rebecca, the maid, the window latch didn't lock. He noticed the blacksmith shop. For years he had walked past it without a thought. Now he saw the tools, the sharpened hooks, the discarded metal, the hammer handles thick enough to crack skulls. He noticed the driver, Pete, slave-turned-overseer in training, who lived in his own cabin as a reward for betraying his own people. He noticed the weak points, the vulnerabilities, the exits, the opportunities. Wasn't surviving anymore. He was preparing Uncle Moses. Sees the truth 2 weeks into Goliath's new watchfulness. Uncle Moses approached him while they worked in the fields. Moses was 80 years old. His back bent, his beard gray and thin, but his eyes sharp as hawks. "You planning something?" he said quietly, not looking at Goliath as he tied his tobacco bundle. Goliath didn't answer. "I've been enslaved longer than you've been alive," Moses whispered. "I know the look of a man who's thinking murder." Still, Goliath said nothing. "Don't worry," Moses said. "I'm not here to talk you out of it." That made Goliath's hands pause for half a second. Moses glanced around, making sure no overseers were close. "You might be strong," Moses whispered, "but you ain't invincible. You'll need help, and you'll need people you can trust." Goliath finally looked at him. "Why would you help me?" he asked. Moses gave a tired, humorless smile. "I'm old," he said. "Too old to run, too old to fight. But I ain't too old to want to see justice." He leaned closer. "And because that man," he nodded toward the big house, "sold your pregnant wife. That's evil even by their standards. Somebody got to pay for it." Goliath lowered his voice. "What if I told you what I'm planning? If we are caught, you'll die." Moses chuckled softly. "Boy, I've been dying for 80 years. There ain't nothing left they can do to me that I ain't already felt." He straightened slowly. "So I ask again, you need help?" Goliath hesitated, and then nodded. "I need 3 things," he said. "I need to know who I can trust. I need to know every inch of the big house. And I need to know when Marcus Doyle comes back." Moses nodded, already thinking ahead. "Then we better start," he said, "before anger cools and before courage fades. The Allies over the next 2 months." Goliath built something Blackwood Plantation had never seen before, a coalition. A circle of trust among people who had been trained since birth never to trust anyone. Josiah, the blacksmith, 30 years old. Muscles thick as tree roots. His wife had been sold 2 years earlier. He wasn't afraid of death anymore, only living without justice. He had access to every metal tool on the property, and he had rage. "Say the word," Josiah said, "and I'll turn my forge into a damn armory." Ruth, the midwife 45, quiet, watchful, her Hands had delivered babies and also prepared herbs that could kill silently. She had seen 3 of the babies she delivered sold before. Their mothers had even healed. "Just tell me what they need to drink," she said. "I can make men stop breathing without leaving a mark." Samuel, the young strength 23. Strongest man on the plantation besides Goliath, he didn't hesitate. "I'll follow you anywhere," he said. Moses, the strategist, old bones. Sharp mind. 60 years of knowing every road, every hiding place, every route used by the Underground Railroad. "I can get you north," he said. "But you'll have to buy the time." Blood buys time. Rebecca, the housemaid, 18 years old, trusted by Mistress Constance, invisible in plain sight, the eyes and ears of the enslaved inside the big house. She came to Goliath's cabin at night, heart pounding but voice steady. "Miss Constance talks like we aren't even there," she said. "I know every room, every lock, every habit." She listed them. Guest room window latch broken. Jacob sleeps with pistol. Nathaniel Jr.'s rifle unloaded half the time. Thornton's cabin unlocked every night at 10 p.m. Constance checks the doors at exactly midnight. Blackwood checks his rifle every night, then drinks himself into stupidity. "And," she added, "the Harrisons died in a kitchen fire 2 weeks ago." "That wasn't no accident," Moses grinned. "Slaves all across Virginia are getting smarter," he said. "Accidents happening everywhere. The South is trembling." The plan they met in Goliath's cabin. 5 enslaved people sitting in the shadow of a giant. Goliath didn't soften his words. "This isn't escape," he said. "Not yet. This is revenge." Eyes met eyes. Nobody objected. "I'm killing all of them," he continued. "Cornelius, Constance, Jacob, Nathaniel, Thornton, Dr. Whitmore, Driver Pete. And when Marcus Doyle returns, him first." 8 people, Samuel whispered. "In one night," Goliath said. "After that," Moses added, "we run north into the mountains." Rebecca looked down at her hands. "Miss Constance once slapped me so hard I couldn't hear for a week," she said, "because I put too much sugar in her tea." She lifted her chin. "I want in." Josiah stepped forward. "Master Blackwood sold my wife," he said, laughing when he did it. "I'm with you." Ruth's voice was soft but steel. "They took my daughter," she said. 6 years old. "I'll help." Samuel simply nodded. Moses smiled a terrible smile. "Well," he said, "ain't this something?" Goliath looked at them all. 3 weeks, he said. October 23rd, the night of the harvest celebration. They'll all be drunk, all careless. "We get one chance," Moses nodded. "One chance is enough." The preparations, 3 weeks of quiet rebellion. Raised voices, no suspicious behavior. Just planning, just gathering, just sharpening the storm. Josiah smuggled tools from his forged knife blades, metal bars, hooks. He hid them in hollow logs, under loose floorboards, beneath piles of firewood. Ruth collected herbs like she was preparing for childbirth. But she gathered poisonous ones too: oleander, hemlock, Jimson seed, enough to kill a man 10 times over. Rebecca walked through the big house with calm confidence, studying every lock, every late-night footstep, every key on the ring at Cornelius's belt. She mapped the house in her mind. "Master Blackwood checks the doors at midnight," she whispered one night. "If he's drunk enough, he forgets the back door entirely." Samuel prepared for battle the only way he could, working harder, building strength, waiting. Goliath prepared differently. He took his chains each night, 20 pounds of iron, and wrapped them around his wrists. He pulled until his hands bled, until the metal groaned. He tested weak links, bent them, broke one, practiced swinging the chain like a weapon. He memorized the weight, the feel, the arc it made through the air every night. He whispered Naomi's name, and the child's name he would never get to know. By October 20th, he was ready. By October 21st, fate shattered everything. Marcus Doyle arrived early, 2 days early, and he brought news. News that broke the man the whip never could. October 21st, 1856. 2 days before the uprising, a day Goliath had been preparing for silently, carefully, relentlessly. But fate did not care for human plans, even those forged by giants. At 3:00 p.m., a wagon rattled up the dirt road toward Blackwood Plantation. Dust rolled behind it like smoke. Voices rose in greeting. Goliath heard it from the tobacco. "Fields," he froze mid-step. Marcus Doyle early too. Early. Goliath's heart dropped into a cold pit inside his chest. He didn't run. Running would draw eyes, but he walked with purpose. The massive tobacco bundle forgotten in the dirt. Uncle Moses saw him passing and whispered urgently, "Don't, whatever you're thinking, don't." But Goliath was already gone, already moving toward the big house, toward the open windows where men talked freely, because they believed those listening didn't matter. He knelt beside a broken wagon wheel, pretending to fix it. Close, enough to hear everything, the news that ended the man. He had been inside the house. Marcus Doyle accepted a glass of whiskey and lowered himself into a chair. Cornelius stood eagerly before him. "Well?" Cornelius asked. "You said there was news about my investment." Doyle sighed dramatically. "She delivered," he said. The words hit Goliath like a hammer to the chest. "She delivered 2 weeks ago." "In New Orleans?" Cornelius leaned forward. "And?" Doyle hesitated. Then, stillborn, Goliath felt the earth tilt beneath him. "Too large," Doyle continued casually. "The child was misshapen. The body couldn't handle the strain. It tore the mother apart." Cornelius stared. "And the woman?" Another pause. "Didn't make it." The world went silent. Naomi was dead. The child was dead. Everything he had survived. Everything he had planned. Every piece of pain he had carried waiting for a future was gone. Just gone. As casually spoken as the price of a mule, Marcus Doyle kept talking. "That's how it is with these experiments. Nature isn't kind when we try to cross such extremes. A shame, but at least you got your 3,000. Cornelius nodded, thoughtful more than sad. "Well," Cornelius said, "profit is profit." That word struck Goliath like another blow. Profit. His wife. His child. Their suffering. Their death, profit. Then Doyle added, "And I've got an offer for him too, the giant. Mississippi plantation. $8,000. If you want to sell." Goliath heard no more. Inside his chest, some last fragile piece of humanity, finally broke. Not cracked. Shattered. Thornton makes a fatal mistake. "Boy." Overseer Thornton barked. Goliath didn't move. "Boy, what are you doing? Get back to work." Goliath turned slowly, too slowly, and looked down at Thornton. For the first time in his life, Thornton saw something in Goliath's eyes that made him afraid. Something ancient. Something murderous. Something that had stopped being human in the way white men measured humanity. Thornton's hand went for his pistol. He didn't make it. Goliath's hand shot forward like lightning, closing around Thornton's throat. The overseer's feet left the ground. He clawed at the iron grip. His face turned red, then purple, then darker. A scream went up from the house. The giant's gone mad. But Goliath wasn't mad. He was calm, too calm. With one squeeze, one quiet, cold motion, Thornton's neck snapped. "Thee." Sound echoed across the yard like a broken tree limb. Thornton's body fell limp in his grip. He dropped it without looking. The charge toward Deathmaster. Blackwood and Marcus Doyle burst onto the porch. "Goliath!" Cornelius shouted. "Put him down!" Too late. Cornelius fumbled for his pistol. Goliath walked toward him, not rushed, not frantic. With slow, terrifying purpose, Cornelius shot him. The bullet hit Goliath in the shoulder. He staggered, did not stop. Cornelius fired again. A second bullet smashed into his chest. Goliath dropped to one knee. Everyone froze. Then the giant rose, slowly, deliberately, standing tall even as blood soaked his shirt. "You sold my wife," Goliath said. The words rumbled through the yard like thunder rolling in a storm. "You sold my child. They were my property." Cornelius screamed. "I was never your property," Goliath replied. "I was only waiting." Cornelius fired again, missed. Goliath reached the steps. 23 steps to the porch. He had counted them for weeks. Counted them for a quiet, planned revenge night. Now he climbed them through bullets and blood. Cornelius tried to fire again, but his hands shook too badly. Goliath grabbed him by his expensive shirt and hauled him into the foyer. Jacob's turn. Jacob Blackwood came running with a rifle, yelling, "You animal! Put him down!" He raised the rifle to fire. Goliath moved faster. One hand shot out, closing around Jacob's throat. "You threw bread at my feet once," Goliath said quietly. Jacob's eyes widened. "I remember everything." He lifted Jacob off the ground and threw him across the foyer. The young man struck a wall with a crunch. He slid down it. He did not move. Again Cornelius screamed. Goliath silenced him with a fist that sent the master sprawling back into the parlor. Mistress Constance's fear Constance shrieked as Goliath entered the parlor. "Please," she cried, "please, don't hurt me." "You called my wife girl," Goliath said. "You laughed when they took her away. I'm sorry." "No," Goliath said. "You're scared. That's different." He grabbed her by the throat, not squeezing, not yet, and shoved her into her favorite chair. "Stay," he ordered. She froze, too terrified to move. He left her alive. For the moment, there were two more predators to hunt. Nathaniel Jr.'s end. Nathaniel Jr. was upstairs, trying desperately to load his rifle. Bullets fell from his shaking hands. "Stay back," he shouted. "Stay back or I'll—" He never chambered around. Goliath took the rifle from him like taking a toy from a child, then he swung it. The stock cracked. Nathaniel's skull bone shattered. Nathaniel dropped Goliath, stepped over him like a broken fence post. "The doctor faces the specimen, doctor." Whitmore was halfway out the broken guest window latch Rebecca had mentioned. Goliath grabbed his ankle and pulled him back inside like hauling in a fish. The doctor hit the floor, gasping. "I can explain," he babbled. It was science, purely academic. "You cut me," Goliath said. 23 times. I was studying, and now," Goliath said, "I will study you." He emptied Whitmore's medical bag onto the floor. The doctor screamed when Goliath picked up the scalpel. Those screams echoed through the big house, slicing through the chaos like a blade. Goliath gave him 23 cuts. Whitmore didn't survive. Outside, the plantation rises gunshots, screams, a body thrown through a window. It didn't take long for the enslaved people to realize what was happening. They gathered outside the slave quarters, confused, frightened, then electrified. "Tonight," Moses shouted. "It's happening tonight!" Josiah burst from the blacksmith shop with an armful of weapons. "Who's with us?" he roared. Hands rose dozens. The enslaved had lived in silent fear for decades. But fear tonight turned to fury. They stormed Driver Pete's cabin. He screamed, but 40 people fell on him. The man who had betrayed them for years. When they were done, Pete was unrecognizable. Tonight, no one begged for mercy. Mercy had never been given to them. Master Blackwood's death Goliath found Cornelius in his study, trying desperately to reload his rifle. Bullets slipped from trembling fingers. He looked up. "Face white as chalk." "No," Cornelius whispered. Goliath grabbed him by the shirt. "My wife's name was Naomi," he said. Cornelius whimpered. "My child," Goliath growled. "I'll never know if son or daughter. It was just business." Cornelius cried. It was everything personal. Goliath dragged him to the window, the same window Cornelius used to stand at, surveying the plantation he thought he owned. "You like the view?" Goliath said. "Let me show you a better one." He threw Cornelius Blackwood through the window. The master hit the ground 2 stories. Below, he died instantly. The Messibo Vita. Slave trader meets his chains. Marcus Doyle was already running for his wagon. Goliath walked toward him. Each step left a bloody footprint. "You told him she was dead," Goliath said. "I'm sorry," Doyle gasped. I'll pay you. I have money. 3,000, take it all." 3,000, Goliath repeated. "That's what my wife's life was worth to you." He grabbed the chains attached to Doyle's wagon, iron thick enough to restrain multiple people. He wrapped them around Doyle's neck and pulled. Doyle's screams ended quickly. Goliath didn't stop until well after the man was gone. By sunrise, 8 white people were dead. Cornelius Constance, Jacob Nathaniel Jr. Thornton, Dr. Whitmore Driver Pete Marcus Doyle Blackwood. Plantation, one of the proudest estates in Halifax County, was silent. Every enslaved person now stood free, not legally, but actually. And in the middle of it all, bleeding from gunshots, drenched in blood, stood Goliath, the giant who finally broke, the giant who made the South tremble, the giant who was not done yet. "What do we do now?" Samuel approached, trembling. "What do we do, Goliath?" Goliath looked north, toward freedom, toward mountains, toward war. "We run," he said, "and we never stop fighting." Midnight, October 23rd, 1856. The night Halifax County would never forget. The big house lay in ruins, windows shattered, doors broken, bodies cooling on hardwood floors slick with blood. The enslaved stood outside in silence, breathing the cold night air like it was the first real breath of their lives. Goliath, bleeding from multiple bullet wounds, stood in front of them all. Bare-chested, chain in hand, towering like a bleeding god of vengeance, Uncle Moses stepped forward, voice trembling. "Boy, you're hurt bad, I know," Goliath said. His voice steady, determined, but not enough to stop. "A choice, stay a slave or die free, Rebecca." The housemaid, who risked everything by feeding information to Goliath's plan, stepped beside him. "The militia will come," she warned, "by morning. They'll bring dogs, horses, every white man with a gun." Goliath nodded. "We leave now," he said. He looked at the group, 53 enslaved souls from Blackwood Plantation, joined by a few who slipped in from neighboring farms, drawn by the sound of gunshots and screams. "Anyone who wants to stay," Goliath said. "Stay," he paused. "But anyone who wants freedom, come with me." There was no hesitation. Not a single person stayed, because once you see chains break, once you hear a master scream, once you watch one man stand up against everything, the old fear dies and a new kind grows. The fear of returning to what you once accepted. The long walk begins there. Moved into the woods behind the plantation, quiet, organized, and fast. Uncle Moses led the way with a lantern wrapped in cloth to dim the glow. He knew every path, every crossing, every hidden creek bed. "Stay close," he whispered. "We got miles to go 'fore dawn." Children were carried. The elderly supported. Tools, weapons, and blankets were divided, but the group slowed repeatedly. Because Goliath walked wounded, Josiah, the blacksmith, whispered, "He's losing blood fast." "We can't stop, Ruth," the midwife replied. "If we stop, we die." And so they pressed deeper into the trees. Behind them, the plantation smoldered. A piece of the slaveholders' world burned away. The first sign of pursuit. They weren't 2 miles into the forest when Moses froze. Everyone stopped instantly. "Dogs," Moses whispered. In the distance, faint but unmistakable, the baying of bloodhounds. Goliath tightened his grip on the broken chain. "They're far," Samuel whispered. "Maybe miles." "No," Moses said. "They're coming fast," Ruth gasped. They found the bodies already. Not the bodies. The silence. Farms did not stay quiet after gunshots. Someone had ridden to warn the sheriff. "Keep moving," Goliath ordered. "If we don't reach the river by dawn, they'll corner us." Crossing the Roanoke by daybreak, they reached the Roanoke River, a black ribbon of moving water reflecting the faint morning sky. Cold, deep, dangerous. But the slave catchers were more dangerous. Josiah waded in first. "Testing the current. Strong," he said. "Too strong for the little ones." Goliath limped forward. "Give them to me," he said, one by one. Mothers handed their children to the giant covered in drying blood and fresh wounds. He crossed first, holding 2 children to his chest while the water reached his neck, but he didn't falter. Behind him, others followed, some swimming, some floating on logs, some pushed in makeshift rafts Moses had hurriedly crafted. On the far side of the river, Goliath set the children down gently. "We made it," Rebecca breathed. "No," Moses said quietly. "We bought time." The dogs arrived moments later. Barking erupted from the opposite bank, torches, shouts, rifle barrels glinting through trees. "There," a white voice bellowed. "Tracks leading to the water." A shot cracked across the river. People screamed and ducked. "Run!" Goliath roared. The group fled into the deeper forest while the dogs barked madly. Unable to track scents washed away by the river. For the first time since the escape, the slave catchers had lost the trail. A desperate retreat. Into the mountains, they traveled by night, hid by day. Even the children stayed silent. Fear had taught them discipline. Ruth made medicines from herbs. Moses scouted ahead. Samuel helped the wounded. Rebecca, nimble and sharp-eyed, became the lookout. But Goliath weakened. The bullets in his shoulder and leg festered. Every step was agony, every breath a struggle, but he refused to rest. On the 5th night, Rebecca confronted him. "You'll die before we reach the mountains." "Not yet," he said. "You can hardly stand." Goliath leaned against a tree, chest heaving, blood soaking through bandages. "My son never breathed," he said. "My wife died alone." His voice cracked. I'm not dying until every last one of you is safe." The group moved again, and so did he, bleeding, limping, but unbroken. The slave catchers. Close in 2 nights later, the distant sound of bells echoed through the valley, the warning bells slave patrols used. Moses swore under his breath. "They found the river exit," he said. "They'll be on us by dawn." Goliath straightened painfully. "How many?" he asked. "Could be a dozen," Moses said. "Could be 50. Goliath nodded. "Take the group ahead." Up the mountain trail, Rebecca stared at him. "What about you?" Goliath wrapped the broken chain around his fist. "I'll slow them down." Samuel stepped forward. "I'll help." "No," Goliath said. "You're the strongest after me. They'll need you to keep going. But you'll—" Goliath put a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Go." Moses grabbed Samuel's arm. "Boy, listen to him." "He's right." Samuel swallowed hard, then nodded. The group of 46 began ascending the mountain trail. Goliath waited alone, listening, breathing, bleeding, ready. At last, voices emerged from the trees, dogs barking, metal clattering. Men running. Goliath stepped forward into the moonlight. The slave catchers skidded to a halt. Someone screamed, "Dear God, it's him!" The legend in flesh, the giant with the blood-stained chain. Goliath roared so loudly it shook the valley, and he charged. The battle in the trees. The first man went down with a single blow that snapped his spine. A dog leapt. Goliath grabbed it mid-air and hurled it into a tree. A rifle fired. Point blank, the bullet caught him in the ribs. Goliath staggered, then swung the chain so hard it crushed the gunman's skull. Another shot, another wound. But Goliath did not fall. He fought with the fury of a father robbed of everything, a husband mourning a stolen wife. 5 minutes later, 3 slave catchers lay dead. The rest fled, terror overcoming courage. Goliath, trembling, bleeding heavily, leaned against a tree. He looked up at the moon. He whispered Naomi's name, then forced himself to move. North, toward the mountains, toward the people depending on him. Reaching the blue ridge 2 weeks later, starving, exhausted, half dead, the group reached a hidden community deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a maroon settlement, a refuge. A miracle. The elder woman named Grace approached them. "You're the ones from Blackwood," she said. Goliath nodded. "We are." "You have many wounded," Grace said, "and you look half dead yourself. Come in. You're safe now." For the first time since Naomi's death, Goliath let himself breathe. They had made it. Souls escaped slavery because one man broke his chains. The Blue Ridge Mountains were colder, harsher and lonelier than the plantation fields, but they were free. Truly, unmistakably free. For 4 long years, the hidden maroon settlement became home to the 46 people who had escaped Blackwood Plantation, a place where no overseer barked commands. No whip cracked, no chains clattered, and at the center of that fragile freedom stood the giant who took them there. Goliath, bleeding, scarred, but alive. Alive enough to inspire fear, awe and hope in equal measure. Life in the mountains, Goliath healed slowly. Ruth tended his wounds with mountain herbs and whispered prayers. Rebecca cooked for him through the nights he couldn't stand. Samuel built a larger cabin, reinforced with logs so the giant could finally stand upright indoors. Josiah forged tools, axes, knives, traps, to help the community survive. And Goliath worked. He chopped wood with a single swing, carried logs that took 3 men to lift, cleared land for crops, built cabins for new arrivals. He became a symbol, not of violence, but of strength used for protection. Children, who had once cowered at the sight of him, now followed him like he was a guardian spirit. One little girl, named Clara, used to hand him flowers every morning. For the giant, she'd say he kept them all. The growth of a myth-escaped slaves traveling through the mountains brought stories, stories from plantations, stories whispered in fields, stories that spread faster than dogs could track. They said a giant killed 8 white men, a giant broke chains thicker than a wrist, a giant carried children across the river like it was nothing. A giant stood alone against slave catchers and didn't fall. But each time the story spread, it grew. 8 men became 10. 10 became 20. 1 plantation became 3. And Goliath never corrected them, because the truth was already powerful. But the myth was unstoppable. Fear in the South plantation owners across Virginia were terrified. They slept with pistols under pillows, hired extra patrollers, built stronger slave quarters, reinforced doors, added locks. Some even wrote letters begging the legislature to pass stricter laws. A plantation owner in the county wrote, "The Negroes are changing. They walk differently, talk differently, as though measuring us. Something is coming, something terrible." And I fear it began with the giant of Halifax. The South was cracking bit by bit. Fear is a slow poison. And Goliath's name was the venom. A new purpose late one night as Goliath and Moses sat by the fire, the old man spoke. "Boy, you know what you done, right?" Goliath stared into the flames. "I killed 8 people. You did more than that," Moses said softly. "You killed the silence, killed the obedience. You showed every slave in Virginia that a man can break his chains." Goliath didn't answer, because part of him didn't believe it. Part of him still mourned, still felt the hollow in his chest where Naomi and their child should have lived. But he also remembered Naomi's last words, "Remember me." He had. Every day, the life he built here was for her. The fight he continued was for the child who never breathed. The freedom he protected was for the hundreds still in chains. New arrivals. Joined the settlement over the 4 years. Dozens more escaped slaves. Found the community. Some came by accident. Some came guided by whispers of a giant who fought. Bullets. Some came because they refused to die in bondage. A man named Elijah arrived in winter, half frozen, and collapsed at the gates. When he saw Goliath, he whispered, "You're real." Goliath nodded. "What did they do to you?" he asked. Elijah's voice broke. "They sold my wife, my children. I got nothing left. Nothing but my hatred." Goliath put a hand on his shoulder. "Then you belong here," he said. "The calm before the storm for years, the mountains protected them. Steep ravines, thick forests, endless terrain. The militia searched constantly but never found the settlement, until one night in October 1860, Moses burst into Goliath's cabin, panting, terrified. "They found us," he gasped. "Militia. 200 strong guns, dogs, everything." Samuel grabbed a rifle. Josiah reached for his handmade weapons. Rebecca woke the children. Panic exploded through the camp. The elder Grace rang the warning bell, a hollow log that echoed through the valley. Goliath stepped outside slowly, massive silhouette illuminated by firelight. "Everyone who can run," he said. "Run." The people froze. "What about you?" Rebecca cried. Goliath wrapped his chain around his hand. "I'll give you time." "Goliath, no." He ignored them. "I've been dead since they took my family," he said quietly. "This is just my body catching up." He turned toward the clearing where the militia torches glowed like a river of fire. "Killing me won't stop them," Moses said desperately. "They'll still come for the rest." Goliath knelt beside the old man, eyes soft. "You said something once," Goliath reminded him. "Freedom isn't given. Fair's taken." He stood. "I'm taking time for you." "That's enough." The final walk the militia organized at the edge of the settlement. Torches raised, rifles ready. A captain shouted, "Giant of Virginia! Surrender and you will have a trial." Goliath stepped out into the moonlight. Bleeding, towering, unbowed, his voice thundered, "You can have your trial." He lifted the chain. "Come take it." The soldiers hesitated. Some whispered prayers, some trembled. One said, "Lord, have mercy. He looks like death." And then Goliath charged, toward 200 armed men, toward certain death, toward immortality. The night air in the Blue Ridge Mountains vibrated with something ancient. Not fear, not hope, but destiny. 200 Virginia militiamen stood at the tree line, rifles aimed, hands shaking, dogs snarling at their leashes, and in front of them, walking alone like a storm made flesh, was Goliath, bleeding, bare-chested, a broken chain wrapped around one fist, a stolen rifle in the other. The legend had walked out of the shadows, and the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. "Take aim." Captain Morrison, the militia commander, swallowed hard. The giant was bigger than the rumors, taller than the myths, more terrifying than any nightmare whispered in plantation parlors. "Take aim," he shouted. Dozens of rifles were raised, but not one soldier stepped closer. Goliath stopped 10 yards away. His voice rang out, deep, thunderous, unafraid. "You murdered my people for centuries." He threw the empty rifle aside. "You hunted us, burned us, sold our children. Stole our lives, he lifted the chain, but you never broke us. The first volley fire. Morrison screamed. The gunfire cracked through the night like lightning splitting the sky. Bullets tore into Goliath's chest, arms, side. His giant body jerked from the impact, but he did not fall. He staggered, he bled, but he kept moving. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. "Dear God," a soldier whispered, "how is he still standing?" The charged Goliath roared, a sound so primal it made even the seasoned soldiers flinch. He broke into a sprint, impossible for a man his size, impossible for a man riddled with bullets. He was a blur of fury and muscle and vengeance. The front line faltered. Few fired wildly. Others dropped their rifles and ran, but it was too late. Goliath crashed into them like a collapsing mountain. The killing begins. A rifle butt smashed into his ribs. He didn't feel it. A bayonet stabbed into his shoulder. He ripped it out with a grunt and impaled the soldier who wielded it. He swung his chain in a deadly arc, metal striking bone, skulls cracking like eggshells. One soldier's jaw snapped. Another's spine broke. Third was lifted off the ground and hurled into a tree with such force his neck twisted. Grotesquely, the militia panicked. They'd come to capture a runaway slave. Instead, they'd found a myth trying to live. He won't die. Within minutes, 10 soldiers lay dead or dying. Blood pooled on the forest floor. The dogs tried to attack. Goliath crushed one with his bare foot, flung another into a bush, snapped the third spine with one hand. "Retreat! Retreat!" Someone screamed, but Morrison refused. "Stand your ground. He's just one man." Goliath turned to him. "No," he growled. I'm every man you ever chained." The second volley they fired again at point-blank range. 30 rifles, 30 bullets. Some missed, most didn't. Blood exploded from Goliath's back. He fell to one knee for a moment, just a moment. It seemed his body might surrender, but then he used the chain to pull himself up and stood again. The militia recoiled. "He's not human. He's a demon." "He's possessed." "No," Goliath said, voice ragged but clear. "I'm free." The final minutes, he could barely breathe now. Blood poured down his side like water. His eyes blurred. The world tilted, but he kept fighting. Soldiers swarmed him. He shoved them off. Bayonets jabbed. He snapped them. A sword slashed his back. He grabbed the blade with his hand and broke it in half. With every blow he dealt, every life he took, he bought seconds, precious seconds, for the 80 men, women, and children fleeing deeper into the mountains. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to delay death for them. "Stay down, monster." A young lieutenant approached, trembling but determined. He aimed his rifle at Goliath's head. "Stay down," he whispered. Goliath looked up at him and smiled. "You call me monster, but I die a free man." He grabbed the rifle barrel and bent it into a U shape. The lieutenant screamed. Goliath stood again for the last time. Torches flickered across his blood-soaked skin. He looked north toward freedom, toward Naomi and the child he never knew, and whispered, "I kept my promise." Then he collapsed. Death of the unbreakable, he fell face first, giant body shuddering, breath slowing, but even in death, he would not surrender. They shot him 14 more times to be sure, 37 bullets in total, and still his eyes stayed open, still staring north, still defiant, still free. The aftermath, the militia dragged his massive body down the mountain like a trophy, displayed him in Richmond for a week. Expected fear, expected obedience, expected surrender. Instead, the slaves of Virginia looked at that bullet-ridden body and learned a terrifying truth. It takes 37 bullets to kill a free man, and the South would never sleep peacefully again.